Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on social media at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. So now we're joined by Marcus Moufarrige, CEO of ility. Marcus, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
ility, before we get on to discussing what the company does, explain the name.
Well, I wanted something that was pretty simple it's hard to find a short, simple word that describes everything that you do, but we're really about capability for flexibility and profitability is sort of where we started. And you know, ility is kind of it's a software term, like a technical term for the things that a particular software can do is actually referred to as an ility. And so when I managed to get ility.com, I knew it was fate, and I decided to go down that path.
Very good. Well, look, capability, flexibility, profitability, these are all important terms right now for real estate. So you might just give us a little bit of an introduction to ility and the team.
Yeah, so ility is a no-code framework that's really designed to be the packaging, pricing, and distribution framework for the digital real estate world. And so really, we realized that there wasn't a framework for digitizing real estate. Everybody talks about it, but it doesn't really exist. And so looking at a lot of other industries, we really wanted to work out how other industries had successfully digitized. And we essentially came up with this concept of physical rights management, which is actually kind of similar to digital rights management, but it's basically the packaging, pricing, and distribution of interactions between humans, enterprises, and buildings.
I think it's interesting when you try to compare real estate with other industries, because that's what most people try to do and then realize that leads down a path of frustration. So actually, in comparing how digital transformation has happened in any industries, one of the things we found is that the lack of transformation across real estate is possibly because it hasn't been buyer-led or demand-led from a consumer point of view. The consumers, because it's such a one-off transaction, they didn't seem to care. They were willing to be inconvenienced, unlike with banking or grocery shopping. So when you were looking at other industries, could you point to an industry that had done this really well?
So I think that your point is a very good one. Property used to be a really, really simple business. It was very low touch, very low service, and a landlord would sign, you'd sign a lease for 10 years or for a period of time, and then the landlord would kind of disappear. There would be no service and no interaction with the landlord unless you didn't pay your bill, and then it wasn't a friendly interaction. And so at the end of the day, that was a very simple business, easy to run, not a lot of demand from the end user customer. But things have changed, and so in property, and it doesn't matter what class you're talking about, there is more flexibility, there's more services, there's more amenities, there's more community, and there really is a lot more for a landlord to manage, and that actually creates a lot of complexity. And so, disruption in other industries has come because complexity already existed, and digitization enabled a simple solution to that complexity. And really, that's what's driving ility.
I think it's interesting when you hone in on community and amenity, because actually there's been so much talk about the changing trends, and in some way I think perhaps there's some confusion about what the impact that COVID has had, whereas we can see that actually a lot of these trends were in play long before COVID. So in terms of the trends you're seeing, first of all, actually profile, who are your kind of typical customers?
So I worked for 25 years in flexible workspace. And so amazingly, my dad started a WeWork equivalent in 1978.
Okay. A pioneer.
So he was well ahead of his time. And it's a business that's still operating, a company called Servcorp. It's publicly listed, went public in 1999 on the Australian Stock Exchange, operates in 24 countries. I worked in that business for 25 years and actually built all the automation that actually runs that business. And we have been encouraging tenants and small businesses in particular, but also branch offices of multinational companies to use flexible space as a good alternative. So, we were actually really excited when WeWork decided to blow the doors off and show the world that flexibility and amenity wasn't necessarily a niche business, that it was actually something that should be more broadly adopted by the property industry. And so it was definitely emerging pre-COVID. The ability for people to not be locked into a 10-year lease and to expect a level of service and to expect some amenity was really starting to grow, off the back of the co-working trend, and COVID has just definitely accelerated that and really sort of cracked it open in terms of what's next.
Yeah, can we go back a couple of decades? Because actually, you're right, absolutely. We did see that flex space did exist prior to WeWork. I think they marketed it really, really well. They packaged it, and that's a really important function. I'm not playing down that. Actually, I think despite all of the contentious commentary around WeWork, and there can be some personal and professional opinions, but the reality is it was a transformative company and it transformed the industry. And I believe that there's a lot of transformation left that it has yet to do. I don't believe it's lived out its purpose at all
Definitely.
yet. So I think it's an exciting space. But is it fair to say 20 years ago, this kind of flexible space offering was really for early stage or perhaps less financially secure tenants that weren't able to secure long term? No?
Seriously, Servcorp was very much targeted at branch offices of multinational companies. So more than 50% of Servcorp's customers were branch offices of very large companies that just needed a small footprint. So it was about having that flexibility. It was about not having a deep commitment, but it wasn't about being tiny and not being able to afford to have that. It was actually about having the convenience and the flexibility to grow and shrink your business or to try something new. And so, yes, it's definitely good for a small business to keep their rent and their overheads and their people costs low, and that will increase their chance of survival. But large businesses moving into new markets really needed that as well, to keep their overheads low, to increase their chances of survival in a new market. And flexible workspace operators like Servcorp were absolutely awesome for that.
So would you say that these were maybe, when you talk about branch offices, might these be companies coming into new jurisdictions and new countries? So therefore you're serving foreign direct investment?
Yeah, into new markets. I mean, the prime markets that we were targeting was businesses entering new markets, less than 10 people. If you have for any size of business, but the office that you're utilizing flex space for was for less than 10 people. And that was a real sweet spot for the Servcorp business. And it was the secret to its success. And that might mean that you're a really well-established law firm that has 3 or 4 lawyers that specialize in something. It might mean that you're a branch office of a very large company. It might mean that you've got an office in London and you're a really well-established business, but you want to have your toe in the water in Paris or Brussels. And so, flex space is really, really good for that.
Over the last 25 years, have you seen a shift in how commercial real estate is financed? Because we know that previously banks were uncomfortable with short-term, with actually the landlords having short-term tenants. And that's something that actually has been slow to change over the past decade. Have you seen a shift?
I mean, it's super slow to change, but here's a really interesting observation, and hopefully any of the people that are financing property out there will listen to this. There's 2 industries that have essentially a 20 times multiple on revenue. And that's the technology industry and the property industry. And they have 2 really different business models. The property industry have really long-term leases that are supposed to prove that you've got the annuity that's going to be there month in and month out for 10 years in order to give you that valuation, whereas technology businesses are short-term subscriptions. Now, I refer to this as the whales and the sardines, right? And actually, the sardines are just as hard to kill as the whales, right? So if you start, and this is part of what we want to do with ility, right? So we want landlords to recognize that they've invested in an asset, they've built a community, they own that community, for lack of a better word, the same way that Facebook owns their community. They also own all the data associated with that. And there's a really great opportunity to have that community turn into much more of a service business, the same way that Facebook had to work out how to monetize Facebook at some point. So I think there's going to be a real shift in the perception of the community that's in a building to have a lot more value from short-term service, non-rent income. And I think it's an opportunity that landlords haven't yet taken, but I think that it is actually going to start to apply, and you're going to start to see the product that landlords are developing be a lot more iterative, like a software company, so that not only do they get that long-term annuity income stream, but they also have a lot of really small annuity subscription income that's contributing to that, and you can actually treat them with the same valuation. So yes, it's very slow, and the financial institutions they're not up to speed with this at this stage, but I do think it will change. And I think that there's going to be proof points along the way. And I really hoped that WeWork was going to be successful to prove that having hundreds of thousands of subscribers on monthly contracts are just as valuable as having, or maybe even more value on a yield per square foot basis than having very large long-term contracts. It hasn't necessarily panned out like that, but there are lots of good examples where it has. And Servcorp is one of those. IWG is another. And I really think that that is going to shift, but it hasn't yet.
Okay, I completely take that point on board. And, unfortunately, this is part of real estate being such a large ship. It's hard to turn it around quickly when there's so many different players that you need to all row in the same direction. But in terms of, you mentioned there, the services, they're likely to get more iterative, kind of similar to almost like a software offering. But all of this comes back to community. And you're right when you say owning the community and serving the community. So how is the role of landlord changing on foot of that?
So I think the landlords have been thrust into this service business, right? Pretty unwillingly, right? Because the property model is great because you build the asset, you take all the risk, you get a 20% return, you go to the Cotswolds for 10 years, you have to install a destination elevator and you come back and repitch the lease because you're awesome because you put a destination elevator in. And now you've got all of these moving parts creating a really complex business. And whether it's ESG data, whether it's community, like in terms of social interactions, whether it's amenities, whether it's food and beverage services, all of these things, you've been thrust into this new business. And there's two ways to look at it, right? Landlords can either crawl under a rock and become wholesalers of space and basically have their building hotelized by somebody else, and they just become a wholesaler of space, or they can jump into this opportunity and they can actually decide to turn it into a revenue generating opportunity. And, ility is looking to work with the landlords who want to take advantage of that and turn it into a revenue generating opportunity and simplify that complex business with all of those offerings. But I understand some landlords aren't going to want to do that. And maybe it's that their financiers don't want them to go down that path and that they're just better to be a passive wholesale provider of a concrete box. But at the end of the day, I think there's going to be a really good mix.
That term hotelized, I haven't heard that before. I haven't come across.
I think I may have just made it up.
But it's very accurate. You talk about maybe a certain unwillingness for landlords to embrace this new space as a service model, and the man credited with coining that term, Anthony Slumbers, I think he's been really pragmatic about his outlook for property kind of post-COVID, where he talks about, the simple reality is that as humans, we spend 90% of our time indoors. So that's all part of the built environment. So actually, however the shakedown happens, the mix will change, how we use space will change, but we're still going to want to be inside 90% of the time.
Yeah.
So actually the demand for real estate on a whole is unlikely to diminish, but how that breaks down is probably yet to be revealed. I mean, there's
Correct.
so much talk about the future of work, office trends, what we're likely to see. And I mean, you've touched on a lot of it there in terms of community and the collection of ESG data, because we know that that will be the only way to secure investment to keep the built environment going. What are the trends you think maybe have been really incorrectly floated in the context of COVID?
So first of all, I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen next. Like, and anybody who says they know what's going to happen next is probably lying. Like, we don't know what the next step is.
They're not lying, they're forecasting.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a very, we're in uncharted waters. So like, forecasting in uncharted waters is like a weather report in the 70s. I mean, it's probably going to be wrong. So I think that what landlords should be working towards is responsiveness, right? And so because they've had this really slow moving industry that's now becoming a fast moving industry, the infrastructure that they use to run the slow moving industry needs to be modernized, right? And there's a lot of great Proptech around, but the infrastructure itself, in terms of how the modern property product is distributed, is very slow. And so what landlords should be focusing on above all else is responsiveness. So how do they respond to what's going to come next? Because it's coming no matter what. We just don't know exactly what it is. And it's going to change in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. And it may go back to normal. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to respond you want to have a framework that gives you responsiveness. Do I need to be more flexible? Do I need to, be sharing a lot more data with my customers and a lot more transparent, both around billing, but also around data that I'm collecting and data that I have the ability to distribute? And we think that, working on that framework and the ability to be responsive is key. And then the trends that are emerging, I mean, obviously building health is a big one, and that's sort of an immediate knee-jerk reaction to COVID, but I think overall building health is going to become more important. I think that flexibility as a theme, and that doesn't mean flex space like co-working or serviced offices, or what it means is having a much better capability to have a mix of leasing options for tenants. And that isn't just in commercial, that's in commercial, residential, industrial, and retail. And I think flexibility is going to be emerging. And again, you need responsiveness in order to handle that. A lot of landlords, because of the infrastructure they have to run their business, have not been able to respond to flexibility in a native way, right? So it's not a capability that they have in their portfolio to be able to offer. Why we build ility is we want landlords to be able to offer a 10-year lease in the traditional sense to meet the debt caveats and all of those sorts of things, plus be able to offer 30 desks in a co-working space somewhere across their whole portfolio, plus parking, plus 20 spots in the gym, plus some lockers, and do it all in one proposal and do it all in one contract. Yeah. Right. And sorry.
No, go ahead.
And that's a really native capability, or using responsiveness to actually give the customer what they need at the end of the day. So I think that sort of flexibility is going to be a theme that happens. And then I think, the whole ESG, aside from whatever data you're giving to the customers, the ability so right now, all the infrastructure is built for landlords to be able to measure on a building level the performance of the building. But in reality, the landlord only runs 15% of the building. The other 85% is run by the tenants. So giving a facilities manager locked in a basement some stats on what the carbon footprint is for the building actually doesn't create a lot of positive outcomes towards net zero. But actually giving that data directly to the tenants on a per tenancy, per occupant basis, and incentivizing them to use that data to get to net zero is going to have a much broader impact. And something like ility is a great distribution platform for giving them that data.
Yeah, and that's definitely a trend we're seeing. We're already seeing across, say, some states in the US where actually that now some of the data from that actually forms part of the lease negotiations, and that's likely where we're going to get to universally. And look, what you're saying makes absolute sense, except possibly around healthy buildings, because I don't think that's a knee-jerk response to COVID. Actually, I genuinely think that trend was well in play long before COVID, and this move towards healthy buildings, whether it's for acoustic or indoor air quality, or
I agree.
ventilation.
It sort of rose to the top though, right? So there's a whole priority list, and it really bubbled to the top, and then it's sort of going to bubble back down a bit. It's still important, but I just think it's not number one on the priority list, right? I think there's other responses that are gonna happen. But I totally agree with you. It was definitely happening beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, to be honest, I actually love that everybody now knows what a HVAC system is.
Yeah.
Nobody knew, and as content providers in this space, we had a really tough time getting people interested in HVAC systems over the last decade. Now it's like a hot topic.
Yeah.
So you're right. And it's changed from an industry to a consumer conversation as well, which is great. That's a really good point you've made about nobody knows what's coming next. And, you refer to the fact that things might return to normal. But what normal are you talking about? Because we were already seeing so much change. And I know we've said it's a slow industry to change, but look at retail, look at the office market in terms of the shift towards flexibility and a more community-driven approach. We were already seeing a lot of these changes prior to COVID. So even if the pace of adoption we've seen over the past 20 months doesn't continue, we're still on track to improve in terms of hitting sustainability metrics. And obviously, everything that we're working towards on the ESG side of things feeds towards that. But look, responsiveness, I think you're right. It's a good way to approach the traditional industry because it's much less intimidating than technology or Proptech. I think responsiveness is a good way to package that.
Yeah, I think that you very seldom get the opportunity to build responsiveness. It's like everything is, and when I say normal, I mean we're going to get back on the curve, right? Like there's definitely we've got this sort of very volatile situation here where people are at work and they're not at work and they're not going to use the office, and technology's disrupted the actual physical space. I think that they will get back to what is considered normal and will be on the curve, and the curve may have arced up a little bit because of COVID, but at the end of the day there's going to be a curve where you are then responding to your best ability to what the customer wants, as opposed to responding to an emergency situation, which we've been in pretty much a constant state of over the last 2 years. So I think when I'm talking about normalcy, I'm saying, I don't think the world is going to go 100% hybrid or 100% work from home. I think there will some normalcy around society and urbanity will return, and we'll go back to that curve of gradual improvement with some disruption in the middle. But I think that at the end of the day, you don't very often get the opportunity to build responsiveness, and there is a great opportunity right now to relook at the sort of the nature of, or to accept that there's secular change happening in real estate, and say we have an opportunity before we get back to the normalcy of the curve to build the ability to then respond to what is the new normal. And that's sort of what we're getting at.
Yeah, and you made a really important point earlier in the interview, when you talked about that there's no framework for digitizing real estate. So if we bring it back to what ility is doing and the mission there. So just really for myself, but also for the listeners there, ility is essentially a no code platform. So you're involved in connecting new and legacy systems. So that,
correct.
And that's really, we've seen that that's such an impediment to tech adoption, where people have started to adopt tech. It didn't, maybe it didn't perform as expected or as promised or as sold. But as they're bringing in new systems, there's interoperability issues there. And I know landlords are feeling a loss of control there, but also a loss of understanding what the financial implications are going to be. So how does ility address that?
So a lot of being in the Proptech world, you would hear the statement a lot that, you need to break down the silos. Right? That's a very common phrase that's used in Proptech land. Interestingly, many Proptech solutions are actually tackling the problem in its silo. And whilst, because it's digitized, it might remove friction, and it might create efficiency, it might create a better workflow. Interestingly, the holy grail is not breaking down the silos. It seems like that. Actually, the holy grail, particularly if you look at other industries that have successfully digitized, it's rebuilding the silos in an intelligent way that enables you to talk to each other. So the silos are really important. And what historically in property has happened is they've used the hard silos that have been created either by financial structures or by the solutions, the point solutions themselves, creating these silos to protect their space. They've actually used that hard siloing to set rules in the property business. And as you need to be more responsive, those silos do need to come down, and there's lots of great solutions and things like digital twins that are breaking those silos down. Where ility fits is really building the silos back up again in a modern and intelligent way that enables you to have that interoperability that you talk about. And I'll give you a really simple example of another industry that's done this. So, Microsoft are a software company, and it sounds weird to say that they needed to digitize, right? And all of their product was a digital product. So what the hell do they need to digitize for? But in reality, Microsoft used to print their digital assets onto plastic discs and put them in boxes and sell them in stores, right? That's a very analog distribution mechanism. So they knew how to build the software. They knew how to get the software to work on a computer, and everything was all digital, but they didn't have a really good framework for packaging, pricing, and distributing it in a digital way. And so it took digital rights management, that concept, for them to be able to package, price, and distribute their own product digitally, even though they're like the smartest digital company in the world. So that's what we're talking about. So all of these interactions that happen between a human and a building need to be packaged, priced, and distributed in a really homogeneous way to simplify the management of this now more complex business. So literally, ility is a small piece of code that goes around the defined digital interaction that says who can use it, how they can use it, where they can use it, and how much they might pay.
Very good. Marcus, I would love to talk to you for longer about this, but unfortunately we're running short on time. And I'm aware that one of the topics that I really did want to get in with you was around fundraising during COVID. Congratulations to yourself and the team. I understand you raised your Series A during COVID, which I would definitely love to speak to you about another time, because they're the kind of stories that we love for our Proptech startups in Ireland to hear. But I understand that you're likely to be raising a Series B in the second quarter of next year. So perhaps we could touch base with you at that stage?
Definitely. Would love to come back and talk to you again.
Super. Thank you so much. That was Marcus Moufarrige, CEO of ility. And that's it from us this week. Thank you for listening into Property Matters on Dublin South FM. You can get in touch with the show on iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. My thanks to Luke and Peter on sound. We're back at the same time next week. From myself, Carol Tallon, and all the Property District team and the iPropertyRadio team. Stay safe.